So, welcome to West Country Wanderings and welcome to Bourneville here in Birmingham. This is the furthest north I've been on my travels on West Country Wanderings, and you're probably thinking, why have I come here? I wanted to tell you the story of chocolate and canals, well, specifically Cadburys and Canals. This is the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. This is going to be a multi-site video, actually going to be visiting two other locations where there were Cadbury factories right next to either the Worcester, the Birmingham, or the Gloucester and Sharpness Canal, as you'll see later in the video. Before I do any of that though, just wanted to say a big welcome to the county of West Midlands. This is the first time that we visited the West Midlands here, and it's, as I say, it's the furthest north that I've actually been on the channel. It probably won't be the last time, because I'll probably be doing some other forays into the West Midlands, so it's kind of a West Country, West Midlands. It's all West, so it's all good here on the channel. But I say the reason I don't tend to do urban areas on my channel, but we're by a canal, so it's all calm here. Actually, I've just stepped outside the station at Bourneville, and just gone up to the road to make my way across the canal to come onto this side of the towpath. Absolute madness on the road. They're all congested, horns blaring, etc. But here on the towpath, all's good. So yeah, that is Cadbury's factory there, just behind me. So you've got the canal, you've got Cadbury's factory, and you've got the railway, which is the main Gloucester, Bristol, Gloucester, Birmingham railway, which runs up to Birmingham New Street. In fact, I had to, because most trains that are coming from the Gloucester-Cheltenham direction don't stop here, they just fly straight through. So I've had to come up via Worcester and change again at Bromsgrove and catch the local cross city line service, which heads over to Lichfield and get off the train here. But it's a great service, electric train, so it's all pretty good and fast. What I'm going to do first is just tell you a little bit about Cadburys in terms of who were Cadburys, how did they come to start, because it's a really, really interesting story. Apologies if I do look down, because it is quite involved with all the people that were involved at the time back in the 19th century here in Birmingham. Now, Cadburys, the company, was founded by John Cadbury, who was a Quaker. He was born right here in Birmingham. But before I tell you more about John Cadbury, it's worth having a look at his father, who was also a Quaker, and how he came to build up his fortune here in Birmingham, because the family wealth was what was really behind the driving force of establishing this company here in the West Midlands. Now, John's father was called Richard Tapper Cadbury, and I'll drop in the date that he was born. He was actually from, well, most people think he was from Exeter in Devon. He was certainly from Devon, some quite considerable miles south of here, but obviously also in the area that I cover on my channel. And he also came from a Quaker family, and because they were Quakers, they couldn't actually attend university, so they couldn't go into like medical or law, those sort of professions. So instead, he got into textiles. He actually became a draper, and he became a draper's assistant at a draper's shop in Gloucester, some 50 or so miles south of where I currently am. He built up his trade there, and from these skills, he then formed a business with another Quaker called Joseph Lute, L-U-T-T-E, and that became very, very successful. So the drapery business was established in 1794, and it drew on lots of the mill businesses hereabouts, and the canals were just starting to become burgeoned then, so transport was improving, and Birmingham was expanding rapidly. So he built on that and built a great deal of family wealth. Now, Richard's son John was born in 1801, and he went to a school, very renowned school in Nuneaton in Warwickshire. In fact, it was at a place called Harts Hill in Warwickshire, not the one that's in Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. So that's some, 35, 40 miles to the northeast of where I am currently. And again, because he was Quaker, he was limited in what education he could do. So he went into the tea profession. That was a burgeoning business here in the West Midlands, and he learnt the skill of importing tea from the colonies. This later expanded into coffee, and then he decided to start selling drinking chocolate. In fact, he came up with 10 different varieties of drinking chocolate, selling them here in Birmingham. 1846, he established a business partnership with his brother Benjamin. This is where the start of the business that we now know as Cadburys, although it's gone under many changes since then, of course. And this is where it all began, and those original lines of drinking chocolate. He then started to sell cocoa as well, and also had a grocery shop here in Birmingham. John Cadbury was a very compassionate person. In fact, this is obviously to do with the ethos of his religion, the Quaker religion, and he was an early animal rights campaigner. It was something pretty much unheard of those days. He had great care and compassion for animal rights, and this led ultimately to the establishment of the RSPCA. I've just come to one of the many parks here in Bournville. Bournville's a really strange place. Although we're on the edge of the city centre, isn't probably 4 or 5 miles that way. I'll drop in the exact figure. It's very quiet here. I've just been crossing the street there, the road outside the factory. I do some shots of that. I just did a piece about the baths, which I'll include later on. Really quiet, and the parks here is delightful, obviously, where it's still in winter, just about to come into spring. We've got some camellias here, they're all fully in bud, so that's great. But yeah, it's wonderful, very pleasant environment. We're going to do a tour of the village proper. But before I do that, just continue the story of the history of Cadburys here at Bournville in Birmingham. Now in 1879, his sons, that's John Cadbury's sons, Richard and George, they relocated the business further south to Bournebrook Hall. So we went from the city centre to Bournebrook Hall. Now there is a River Bourne, which is how Bournville got its name, hence Bournville, the village on the Bourne. But Bournebrook Hall is actually named after another stream, which is a couple of miles away at Northfield, which is a little bit more to the south here. When they bought that, they also bought a load of land with it. So they set up the factory here, and parts of the original buildings do form parts of the factory which are still going today. Of course, now it has expanded greatly, as we'll see, and I'll do some more shots with my telephoto lens so you get a better idea of the scale of this place. So it's like a village with a factory, it's surrounded by a village. It's a really strange thing, and it's also a model village and a planned village. So yeah, they moved here 1879, set it up, and the reason they chose this, as you've probably seen from when I did the first piece to camera, we've got the railway, so people can move in and out. In fact, just to let you know that the railway station was originally called Sturchley. Sturchley is just the other side of the railway line here from Bournville, so it's called Sturchley Road. Sturchley Street, not Sturchley Road. And then once the village got established that they built up, and the factory, it then changed its name to Bournville. The factory first opened in 1879, and then later in 1893, George Cadbury bought 120 acres. So this is pretty much the land that surrounds the factory today. And the reason he did that was to try and attempt to improve the lives for his workforce. In those days, there was a lot of slum conditions. You had the Victorian houses that were very close together. And he knew this was affecting the capability and productivity of his workforce. And because of the Quaker ethos, he wanted to make a better life for them, to give them access to greener spaces, as you can see here, to make sure they get involved in walking, involved in sports. He provided sports facilities, swim baths, as you'll see in a minute, or to improve their well-being so that they could do their best when they actually entered the factory and he could get the best from them. But as I say, it was a philanthropic thing to do. He wasn't one of these greedy business people that we hear so much about. He really was looking after his workforce here in Birmingham. So why did Cadburys need the canal? Well, it needed raw goods, particularly milk and cocoa beans, which we'll see more when we go to Frampton, back in Gloucestershire, further south of here. without those essential key ingredients, obviously you can't make chocolate. Now the cocoa beans were actually imported from the various colonies in the empire, and they made their way to ports in London, to Southampton and to Bristol, and they made their various ways up the canal network to arrive here at Bourneville and Birmingham. So that was a key ingredient. Of course, the other key thing about the canals was you have raw goods coming in, you also have to export the product that you've made, namely the chocolate. So it was a great way of getting the chocolate into the marketplace and into customers' hands. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to change my lens over. I want my lens which has got a better image stability, and we're going to have a tour through the village here at Bourneville, so you got a flavour of what the Cadbury brothers and their sons created here in Birmingham for their workforce. Now, because the Cadbury brothers and their descendants were all Quakers, when they built this model village, they decided to make it a dry village in terms of no alcohol. In fact, you won't find a pub here in Bourneville at all. The only concession is that when they're playing cricket, they are allowed to serve alcohol at the cricket pavilion, which we saw earlier. In fact, when Tesco opened one of their Tesco Express convenience stores here in Bourneville in 2007, a lot of the local residents complained because they wanted to make sure that they weren't selling alcohol. And that condition continues right through today. Now behind me is Bourneville Baths, which were opened in 1901. As I said, about the philanthropy of the Bourneville brothers, well, the original brothers and their sons. Tradition carried on, and this is one of the many facilities they provided for the staff of Cadburys here in Bourneville. So we're currently on Bourneville Green, and this was the place they created, this model village here in Bourneville in Birmingham. It's a wonderful place, so many green spaces, nice parade of shops there. We're going to have a look at that in a moment. There's another green down that way. In fact, I walked through the factory site, and they've got the cricket pavilion. That seems to be doing some work on that at the moment, but then you've got that huge cricket pitch there right in the middle of the factory, which does look kind of strange these days with the newer modern extensions to the factory around it. But that was what he wanted to do, to create the recreational facilities for his workforce here at Bournville. We've now moved south from the Bournville suburb of Birmingham. We're back into Gloucestershire again. In fact, I'm back at the village of Frampton-on-Severn, which if you've been watching my channel, you'll be familiar with, because I recently did a video about a railway here, more of which in a bit, so watch out for that. But behind me is what was once Cadburys factory here in Gloucestershire. And you're probably thinking, well, why did they have a big factory at Bournville and Birmingham and then needed to then build a factory here in Gloucestershire? Well, I'll tell you some more. Now, Cadbury brothers acquired the land here, and under the defence of the Realm Act, and I'll put that description of what that is underneath, they applied for that in, I think it was 1915, so they started planning permission for in 1915, but by April of the following year, in 1916, this factory was up and running. But you're trying to think, why did they choose this site here, some 60, 65 miles, I'll put in the exact mileage, south of their main factory at Bournville? Why would they want to do that? Well, there's two reasons, of course. One, of course, is the canal. There was an existing wharf here at Freven Bridge, not Freven, we're next to Freven Bridge here, and I'll do some shots of that as well. And we were here the other day when I did the railway, more of which in a bit. So they had the communications, but there was another essential ingredient. In fact, there was two more. We're in the Severn Vale. The Severn Vale lasts, well, if you go that way 2 miles, because you've got the Arlingham Loop that way, it's about half a mile towards the village of Saul and Framelode. And because of that, we're in the Severn Vale, and the Severn Vale is really good agricultural for grass growing because of the flat and the soil, fertile soils, which means there's lots of dairy farms, and because of the dairy farms, it means there's a plentiful supply of milk in this area. So milk arrived here from all the farms hereabouts. In fact, it arrived in horse and cart, by lorry, by canal, of course, and further on down the canal and further up towards Gloucester. In fact, there is a report that it arrived here daily by a chap on a bicycle with 2 buckets either side of the handlebars. I found that on a local source somewhere, but yeah, amazing. So that was that source. The other essential ingredient, of course, in chocolate is not just the milk, it's the cocoa beans. So we don't grow cocoa beans in this country. And the the Cadbury brothers needed to get those they were imported from one of the colonial countries, and they would have come into the UK through the Bristol Channel ports, namely Bristol itself, of course, Avonmouth, and further just down the road here at Sharpness. So they would have come in, and that again would have come up via the River Severn and into the canal to be put into this factory here. I have a couple of relative family connections to this factory. One of which is my uncle. He used to drive lorries. He worked for a company called Canals. They're no longer in existence. I think they were taken over by Dairy Crest. Not sure who owns them now. And he used to drive milk tankers, and he would go to the local farms hereabouts and take the milk to the factory here, drive it to the factory here. And in actual fact, there is a bonus from him doing that, which I'll explain in a moment. The other connection is that I had a great-grandfather called Ambrose Trigg, and he worked here between the mid-1920s right up until the 1930s. Not sure exactly what he did at the factory, but yeah, he worked at this factory too, here at Frampton-on-Severn. Once inside the factory, it then became pasteurised. So they pasteurised the milk here on site, and then they combined that with the ground cocoa beans, which had been ground here, and then the whole thing was mixed together, produced what was known as chocolate crumb. Again, that's where my relative came in, the milk driver from Thames, because one of his bonuses of delivering the milk to the factory here was he would often come back home and bring these bags of broken biscuits, and it was basically just a very rough type of chocolate. Sometimes it could be a little bit bitter and uneven, but yeah, it was a freebie bonus of delivering milk to the factory here. In actual fact, the government took an order out towards the end of the First World War because milk was in short supply, and they not only did chocolate here, but they made tinned condensed milk for general consumption across the UK, so that was produced here. But also they pasteurised the milk here, and it was also taken by barge and narrowboat up to Birmingham to provide Birmingham with milk during the latter part of the First World War. Now, as we have seen at Bourneville as well, where they've provided lots of accommodation and parks, libraries and schools for the employees of the people that worked for Cadburys, because of their religious ethos, they did the same here in Frampton, and they set up sports clubs and built village halls, and we'll go and have a look at one of those in a bit. So they were really looking after their workforce. In fact, this factory here throughout most of the 20th century was the main employer for Frampton-on-Severn and the area around it, and it was a sad day indeed when this factory closed in 1982. So yeah, this is Cadburys Hall here in Frampton. And obviously this is one of many things that were set up by the Cadburys Brothers employer to really look after their employees here in the heart of the village in Frampton in Gloucestershire, as we saw also back at Bourneville in the suburbs of Birmingham. Of course, once the chocolate crumb mix had been manufactured, it was then taken into the barges and narrowboats, moved up the Gloucester Sharpness Canal to Gloucester. It then made its way up the River Severn to Worcester, to the Diglis Basin. Maybe we'll be looking at that later in the video now, because I haven't filmed that bit yet, so that may appear there when we do another site here in the Cadburys and Canals story. And then it made its way onto the Worcester and Birmingham Canal, up those tiny big locks which we looked at the other day on this channel, and made its way to the site at Bournemouth, which you saw in the earlier part of the video. Just a final footnote here at Frampton is that, as you may have seen behind me, you're thinking closed in 1982. It doesn't look derelict, and there seems to be some kind of activity going on. Well, happy to report that the factory building that Cadburys used is still very much in use today. In fact, it's now owned and run by a company called Shipton Mill. Now, they started off just over the way on the Cotswolds at a place called Cadbury, and they make really high quality flour. You can actually go to their site at Cadbury and purchase it. And this is a bulk storage facility that they have here at Frampton, and obviously they use the bulk items, or the bulk flour goes out and is used in the catering world and other areas as well. So it's great to see this factory site here isn't derelict and it's still being used. Sadly though, the flour isn't still shipped out by canal, it is taken by road, but that's progress, I guess. I'm currently at a location called Splat Bridge. Now, the other day I did a video about a disused railway. In fact, it closed about 100 years ago, which went from Froster on the Midland Rail line between Birmingham and Bristol, made its way for about 2 or 3 miles across fields to here on the Sharpness Canal, and also to the former gravel pits here at Frampton-on-Severn. Now, when I looked at the OS map, it indicated and it wasn't very clear because unfortunately they haven't been scanned in brilliantly. They're kind of a bit slightly skew, and it looked like the line made its way to Freedom Bridge, which is where we were earlier, looking at the former Cadbury factory here. I had a couple of comments from people that had subsequently, after viewing my video, and I don't think another video has been made on that particular railway line, they had a look at Google Earth, which is kind of a satellite view. Like if you've got Google Maps, Google Earth gives you a kind of a aerial impression, like if you're looking down it from a drone. And you can also go back in time using Google Earth, putting in particular years. One gentleman went into 2005 and he saw a clear mark of where the railway once ran from Froster to Frampton-on-Severn, and he indicated that it wasn't actually the location where I filmed at Freedom Bridge when I was standing on the towpath, but actually here at Splatbridge, some half a mile or so south of the village. I'm actually looking at the church now. I'll insert some shots of that as well. It's a beautiful location here. The only thing is the towpath axis is on the opposite side of the canal to what the wharf was indicated to be on the OS map. It's just on that side there. And sadly, that side of the towpath is completely inaccessible. It's completely overgrown with shrubbery. So I've had a scan from this side. I've had a look through my telephoto lens. I can't see, sadly, any remains or any evidence of the formal railway being here. I'm not saying it wasn't here, but there is literally nothing to see at this location from the railway. So looking at it myself on Google Earth, it does look like it could well have been here, but sadly there are no more remains at this particular location here at Splatbridge. But hey, it's a beautiful spot anyway, so I'll do some shots here of the canal. Well, I've now moved back up from Gloucestershire. We're back in Worcestershire now. Well, we weren't in Worcestershire before, we were in the West Midlands. We were moved north. We're some 25-30 miles north of Frampton-on-Severn. We're actually in the city of Worcester, though I've just caught a bus. I caught the train to Worcester, and I've just catched a bus, 20-minute bus ride, to a place in Worcester called Blackpool. Now, this here is the Worcester-Birmingham Canal. It's the same canal that we saw when we were at Bourneville here. And the reason I've come here is because the Bristol Street Motors garage, which is just by the side of me and just that way there, was the former site of the Cadburys factory here in Worcester. Now, this may have been the site of the Cadbury Wharf. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think the building's anything to do with the Cadbury site at all, because it's too corrugated and new. It's not like the wooden wharf we saw at Frampton Wharf back at Frampton-on-Severn at all. The other thing to note here is that we've got a railway arch. In fact, that's the main railway which goes north from Worcester up towards through Droitwich and joins the Manor up to Bromsgrove and up into Birmingham. Now that, of course, was significant. This originally, in the First World War, it gives me a link with the First World War on Cadburys and canals and sites, isn't there? Because we've come across that at Frampton as well. This was a munitions site. So this here, we've got this fence here where the industrial estate is now, and you've got the garages, and there's a retail port car, the Elgar Retail Park as well. All of that site was a munitions factory, and it was located here, again for the same reasons that Cadburys chose later, because of the canal and the railway. The munitions site closed at the end of the First World War. In the early 1920s, Cadburys decided to build a factory here. In fact, they were looking at a replacement site because I think it was 1923. There'd been a fire at the Bourneville site, and they were looking to move away from there for a short period while the Bourneville site was being ready for it to be reopened. So they acquired the site here. Initially, a temporary building was done. It then became a permanent home for other Cadbury products. In later years, it was famous for their chocolate biscuits and particularly their cakes. Now, the Cadbury site here, as well as being on the canal and using the canal for shipping the goods back up to Bourneville, and the raw materials, the sugar, and also the milk and the cocoa, which we've spoken about previously at both Frampton and Bourneville, it used this canal. It also had an extensive railway network, as did Bourneville as well, which we haven't mentioned previously. I will do a shot of a bridge which goes over the Worcester, Birmingham, in Bourneville, roundabout now, just so you can see. The bridge is still standing, but the railway isn't used there. But this site had an extensive railway system as well. Now, sadly, Cadburys was purchased by Schweppes in the early 1970s, and this site closed, making 700 odd people redundant in 1971. Now, the other thing to mention about munitions is this was initially a munitions site here at Blackpool. It went full circle because Cadburys built their factory here, making the aforementioned cakes and other ingredients, which was moved up to the site at Bourneville. And of course, it was temporary, their main site, after that fire at Bourneville in the 1920s as well. But in the Second World War, the government took part of the factory site away from Cadburys, and it became a munitions site again, mainly because of the rail connection and the fact it, at that time, was safely enough from the main population hub of Worcester, but of course so close enough for the population to get here, to commute here, to work at that munitions site. But yeah, it was a sad day in the early 1970s, I think it was 71, when some 700 people were made redundant and the site completely closed. In fact, shortly afterwards, it was completely flattened, and now there is I think it's called the Elgar Retail Park, and also the industrial units here at Blackpool in Worcester. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is going to carry on walking down this towpath here. Eventually it ends up in the Worcester city centre, and then it continues on to what's called Diglis Basin, which is where this Worcester-Birmingham Canal meets the River Severn. And that's important for a number of reasons, because if you think back to Frampton, they were shipping their goods that they made, the chocolate crumb, back up the canal, and it went to Gloucester, where it met the River Severn. It then went up the navigable section of the River Severn to the Diglis Basin, and then back up along this canal here, making its way to Bourneville. So it would have passed this Cadbury site too as well. So behind me is Diglis Basin. It was actually restored a few years ago now, probably 10-15 years ago. There's lots of new apartments here where there once would have been warehouses and wharves for the needs of the narrowboats and barges carrying goods on the Worcester and Birmingham Canal up to Birmingham or down to meet the River Severn, back down to the Gloucester Sharpness and into the Bristol Channel. So here would have been again a hive of activity here, this wonderful place, but it's beautifully stored. It's now obviously just for the leisure sector, so there's a marina here and there's places to take care of your narrowboat on the canal here, but it's a wonderful place. There's a pub here and you can get a coffee from the cafe as well, so it's a great place to come while away an hour or two to exploring around Diglis Basin here in Worcester. This is Diglis Lower Lock. This is where the Worcester and Birmingham Canal finally meets the River Severn, making its way some 30 miles down from the city of Birmingham through 59 locks, of which of course 30 we're at Cadburys, where we were the other day. And I've just come across, I think I've come across 6 or 7 walking from where I was earlier in the video at Blackpool down to the River Severn here at Diglis. So it's hard to imagine now, in a cold day in February, on a Saturday afternoon, that this lock here would have been a bustle of activity, with lighters coming down the canal, carrying coal, going up the canal as well. They were coming down from the Midlands down towards Gloucestershire, and of course that chocolate crumb coming up to Frampton, towards Bourneville as well, as much other freight on the canal here. As I say, it's very, very difficult to manage today. I haven't seen one narrowboat because it's the quiet season for the waterways, the inland waterways at the moment, until that won't get going again, probably till around April time. But yeah, this scene would have been an absolute hub of activity. So that's it for West Country Wanderings for today on this canal, exploring the chocolates and canals courtesy of Cadburys at Bourneville, Frampton on the Severn, at Blackpool here in Worcester. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider a subscribe, a like, a share or a comment. Till next time, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, and I hope to see you again on West Country Wanderings again very, very soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.